Now let's talk about solving equations that contain fractions for lesson 28, and I've given you a couple of things to remember. One thing I want to talk to you about in these examples is clearing fractions. If you have an equation, these are the rules. If you have an equation, in other words, it has to have an equal sign, and if there's at least one fraction, you can use this technique to clear the fractions by multiplying each term by the least common denominator. Then you'll be dealing with whole numbers, which are a lot easier to solve equations. So let's try this. First, I have this equation in example 1, x plus 1/9 is equal to negative 7/9. And I don't want to have fractions in it. I'm going to multiply each of these terms by the least common denominator. That least common denominator is 9. So, my first thing that I'm going to do is take x and multiply it times 9, which is the first term. And then I'm going to take 1/9, which is the second term, and multiply it times 9. Now, every time I multiply a fraction times a whole number, I write the whole number as a fraction. And then I'm going to multiply the third term, negative 7/9 times 9. Once again, written as a fraction, 9 over 1. Let's see what this does for us. The first term, x times 9, well, that really just gives me 9x. That's kind of nice. It's a whole number. I can deal with 9x. The second one, 1/9 times 9 over 1, I can cross-reduce those two fractions that are multiplied, and I just end up with the number 1. Then I put my equal sign down, and I do the same thing with the third term, that I'm multiplying negative 7/9 times 9 over 1. Cross-reducing those 9s, I end up with negative 7. This is a much easier equation for me to solve. You see how it has all whole numbers. Now, when you do this process and you clear the fractions, if you do not end up with all whole numbers at this point, you've made a mistake. You might as well scratch the problem out and start the thing all over, because clearing the fractions means that after we clear them, we have all whole numbers in our problem. Now I just follow my steps for solving equations. I'm going to subtract 1 from both sides to get that variable term isolated. I'll have 9x is equal to negative 8, and I'll divide by the coefficient of the x term, and x will equal a fraction, which is fine, negative 8/9. Let's try it again. Example 2 has an equation. It is an equation. It only has one fraction. That's okay. If I only have one fraction, I don't have to worry about the denominator. I know what it is. It's whatever the denominator of that fraction is. So now I'm going to multiply each term, and you can see terms are separated by the equal sign or by plus or minus sign. So I have 3 terms in this problem. I'm going to multiply x over 5 times 5, and once again I'll write it as a fraction. And then I'm going to multiply a negative x, or x here, times 5. And then I'm going to come over and multiply negative 8 times 5. Let's do all 3 of those. When I multiply x over 5 times 5, I cross-reduce. I end up with x. When I multiply negative x times 5, I end up with negative 5x. That's the way we usually write that. And negative 8 times 5, negative 40. So, combine like terms over here on the left. X, which is really 1x minus 5x, would give me a negative 4x equals to a negative 40. I will divide by the coefficient of x, which is divide by a negative 4. And once I've done that, x is going to equal to negative 40 divided by negative 4, which is a positive 10. Example number 3, and we're going to do 3 more of these. If you're feeling comfortable about them, stop the tape and try these on your own and then check your work. Example number 3 has a least common denominator of 3. We have 2 fractions, both of them with a denominator of 3, so we don't have to think too hard. I'm going to, once again, I have 3 terms. I'm going to multiply all 3 of them times that least common denominator of 3, writing it as a fraction when I'm multiplying times a fraction, and writing it as a whole number when I'm multiplying times a whole number. So, let me see if I can get this written down. I multiply x over 3 times 3, cross-reduce, my answer, x. The second term, 2 times 3, well, that's just 6. And the third term, I cross-reduce, and I end up with 7. Now, it's very easy to solve this problem. All I have to do is isolate the variable term by getting rid of that positive 6. X will then be equal to 1. Example number 4 has 3 fractions again, denominators of 2, 5, and 10. With a little thought, you'll probably see that the least common denominator for these 3 fractions is 10. Let's multiply all the terms in the equation by 10. We only have 3 terms in this equation, so we're going to say 1/2 times 10. Written as a fraction, it's 10 over 1. Then we say minus 3/5 times 10 over 1 again, because this is another fraction. And that's equal to x over 10 times 10, written as a fraction again. Let's start at the first one and cross-reduce, and then multiply. 1 times 5 gives me a 5. 5 over 1, which is just 5. Cross-reduce the second set of multiplication. I have now negative 3 times 2, which is negative 6. These are over 1, denominators of 1, so we don't have to write them. Remember, they're whole numbers. And then we cross-reduce the third set, and the 10's reduce, and we just have x over 1, or x. This is pretty easy. All I have to do now is say 5 minus 6, which gives me a negative 1, is equal to x, and that's my solution. And finally, example 5, it is an equation. It has a fraction, at least one fraction, 2 fractions, as a matter of fact, with denominators of 8 and 10. My least common denominator I'm going to choose is one of those denominators. It is 8. So I'm going to multiply each term, and I'm going to write the variable x in the top, in the numerator, which works better for me if I do that. You can do that. Times least common denominator of 8, which is 8 over 1. And then I'm going to multiply my second fraction, also times 8, written as a fraction, 8 over 1. Cross-reduce the first one. The 8's go away. I end up with 3x is equal to, reduce these fractions, and I end up with 3x is equal to 4. Now I want to divide both sides by the coefficient of x, and that gives me x equal to the fraction of 4/3.